Hello again. As you know, I am Eli, the computer guy, and today we're going to be doing an introductory class on AWS, Amazon Web Services. Now, you may be wondering, Eli, at this point in time, why are we doing a class on AWS? And the reason we're doing a class on AWS now is because AWS is becoming more and more relevant every day. So AWS has been around for 10 or more years at this point, so it may seem like an old school technology, but it's one of those technologies that while, yes, it is old school, it is now becoming more and more used. So in the past, it's kind of like where I talk about, if you were a system administrator back in 2000, you could be a system administrator that only knew Windows. You knew Windows 2000 and Windows Server 2000, and that's it. You didn't have to know Linux, you didn't have to know Unix, you didn't have to know Mac. You could simply know Windows. Now, in the modern world, if you're going to be a system administrator, you need to know Windows, and you need to know Linux, and you need to know Mac, and you need to know some other proprietary systems. AWS is kind of that way, where up until recently, you could say, oh, I don't know AWS, I don't understand AWS, I have my own private infrastructure that I deal with, and AWS is something out there. Well, in this modern world, more and more things are going onto the cloud. There's more and more business sense to move things onto the cloud. So just like in 2007, 2008, it was a really good idea for Windows administrators to start learning Linux. We're kind of at that point now with cloud. Like you're not gonna get fired because you don't know AWS. You can probably still get hired if you don't know AWS. But those days are coming to a close. In the next couple of years, if you don't understand AWS, if you don't understand Azure, if you don't understand these other cloud services, you're just gonna be, obsolete, right? So we're gonna be talking about Amazon Web Services today. Basically, again, this is an introductory class in order to get your head around what Amazon Web Services are. The big reason that I do classes like this is because there's a lot of material out there to teach you AWS once you understand what AWS is. Once you understand what AWS is, and once you understand why AWS is relevant, there are a zillion classes out there. Amazon offers classes, there's a million classes on YouTube, the whole nine yards. But the thing is, the problem that I see with most people is they just don't really grasp why AWS is important. And so if you don't really understand why it's important and the things that you need to be thinking about, then all of the education, don't really matter. Now, before we get into the class, I do have to talk about sponsors for a minute, because of course, sponsors pay the bills. And not only do sponsors pay the bills, but like having sponsors actually has the benefit of other companies are interested in what I do. And so they offer services and things to me so that I can offer things to you. So let's talk about our sponsors for a minute. We do have a new sponsor today. Yay! INE. INE specializes in network training with hands-on labs, on-site boot camps, and a focus on delivering the best in online networking courses. INE.com. BugCrowd. Calling all security researchers and pen testers. BugCrowd pays up to $15,000 per bug in top tech companies. Join the hunt and learn more at bugcrowd.com. Schoolie Mitchell. Schoolie Mitchell's purpose is to increase clients' profits by reducing telecom costs using software and processes at no risk. We only share savings. SchoolieMitchell.com. Plixer. With Scrutinizer and NetFlow data, users can determine what traffic is on the network, who is originating the traffic, and who is receiving it. Plixer.com. Spiceworks, the best online community for IT professionals to help solve your tech problems. Community.spiceworks.com. And finally, Gilware Data Recovery and Backup Solutions. Gilware's partner programs help computer repair and IT professionals make money by offering data recovery and backup services to their customers. Gilware.com. And as always, I don't ask you to subscribe, I don't ask you to thumbs up, I don't ask you to leave a comment, but if you can click on the links below, follow those back to the websites, and take a look at the sponsors, that's all we really care about around here. So let's talk about what is AWS. When we start talking about AWS, when we talk about Amazon Web Services, what are we actually talking about? Again, in the technology world, one of the biggest problems that we have is whenever we're talking about something, a lot of times people don't have the same definition in their head. This goes back to what I talk about a lot, this whole idea of Socratic argument, the whole idea that a lot of times when people are arguing about something or they're talking about something, that they really have two different definitions in their head. So one person has a definition in their head for a word, and another person has a different definition in their head for a word, and so so they're arguing about this one word, and the reason that they never come together is because they're arguing about the wrong thing. And so when we start talking about AWS, this is something that you have to think about. And the important thing to understand about AWS, when we're talking about AWS, is this is IaaS technology. This isn't one of the others, PaaS and MaaS and SaaS. It's IaaS. And if you understand that it's IaaS, AWS makes a lot more sense. So IaaS stands for Infrastructure as a Service. Infrastructure as a Service. So it's not a single platform. It's not PaaS, Platform as a Service. It's not Software as a Service, SaaS. It's Infrastructure as a Service. So what are we talking about when we talk about Infrastructure as a Service? So the idea here is that they're not offering you one set solution. They're not offering you one single product. They're offering you a lot of different products to allow you to build your own cloud infrastructure. So they offer compute services, they offer storage services, they offer networking services. The networking service is actually kind of cool. If you're actually like an IT professional and you haven't looked at like the whole networking services that AWS, it's something you should look at. It's kind of curious. They offer database services. They also offer like DNS and internet-based traffic services. And the idea here is they offer you all of these different components so that you can mix and match to build your own infrastructure. So you're not simply building virtual servers here. You're not simply using some web hosting service or some service that somebody has given you. What you're able to do is they give you all of these different components, and then you can build them however you like. So even as something as simple as storage, right? So when we talk about AWS and we talk about storage, you think about it like, okay, storage, Eli, you mean that's disk space. Okay, so they're like Google Drive, or they're like Dropbox, right? No, right? So Google Drive or Dropbox would be basically software as a service, SaaS. What this is infrastructure as a service. Is if you take a look at the storage options AWS gives you, they have a lot of different options, right? So they have their normal storage blocks. So this is something that would be akin to basically like kind of like a virtual hard drive. So they have that. But then they have things like their content delivery network, their CDN. So where their CDN, what happens is if you have a website that offers any kind of media, essentially with what a CDN is, you have all of your data stored at one main data center. And then when different users try to come to your website from different places in the world, the pieces of media that they're trying to access automatically get transferred to the data center that is closest to them, so that there's the lowest latency, the highest speed. So they have things like that. They have what's called Amazon Glacier. So with Glacier, what's really cool is, let's say you need storage, but you don't actually need to access it very often. So let's say you're going to be doing data backup. So let's say you have servers in your own premises and you're backing up into the AWS cloud, and you need storage. So you need all that data stored up in the cloud, but it doesn't have to be very available. Like it's not like you're going to be accessing this data every day, every week, hell, maybe even every month, right? Maybe the only time you're ever going to access that data is when you're going to do some kind of recovery. So if you're not going to access the data a lot, then you don't want to pay very much in order to store it up in the cloud. So Amazon offers their Glacier service. This is an exceedingly low cost storage service. It's like something like what is it? It's not even 1 penny. It's 70% of a penny. A seventh of a penny, 7/10 of a penny. It's 7/10 of a penny per gig, right, for storage up there. And so the idea here is basically you can build what you need. So do you need storage on the internet that's going to be accessed a lot? Then you use their storage blocks. Do you have storage on the internet that's only going to be accessed like every year? Then you can use something like Glacier. Do you have storage that's going to be used for media files? Then you use their content delivery network, right? They have all of these different services. So basically that's what we're looking at with AWS, and we're talking about this whole infrastructure as a service, is it's not storage as in Google Drive. It's not storage as in Dropbox. It's that there's all of these different options, even with things like compute. So with compute, they have their own virtual server services, so you can run a virtual server, right? So you can upload and install a Windows 2012 virtual server or a Linux virtual server. Again, that's the kind of thing they're used to. Or you can use their Lambda option, and their Lambda is just pure compute. It's just pure compute. You feed a Node.js script, and then it just does the Node.js script. When you're talking about Lambda, you say, well, is that Linux? Is that Windows? Is that Unix? Who the hell knows? It's Lambda. Right? And so, again, this is where you can build out your infrastructure. Do you need to be able to deal with user accounts? Do you need to really get into an operating system and highly configure it? Or do you just need compute to run a script? You can go through and you can decide what you want to do. Again, the databases. Do you set up your own database server up there, or do you use something like their Cassandra MySQL implementation? There's all of these different options, and the idea here is that you get to build out your infrastructure. So back in the old days, 2009, right? If you're going to build out your infrastructure, what would you do? You would go and you would go into the data center that you had for the company, and you would build out the data center with air conditioning, lights, and all that kind of stuff. And then you would put in your server racks, and then you'd say, okay, well, we need 5 Active Directory servers in a cluster, and we need 5 database servers in a cluster, and we need our antivirus server over here, and we need our Exchange server over here, and those are all going to be connected using switches and routers. We're going to have this multi-layer network, and you would build that out physically. So before, you had this physical infrastructure, and you would build it out, and so it would be a Dell server here and an EMC thing here, and whatever you built out. The thing to be thinking about when you're doing AWS is the exact same type of concept. You are building out that infrastructure, but instead of using Dell or EMC or any of that other kind of hardware, now it's all this virtualized infrastructure. So I'm going to be using Lambda, and I'm going to be using Glacier, and I'm going to be using this, and I'm going to be using that, and this is going to connect to this, and this is going to be connected to this, and there's going to be a firewall in between, and then you can build out that infrastructure to do whatever it is you need. Now, one of the cool things whenever you're dealing with AWS, and especially this is something you have to be thinking about whenever you're going to be dealing with infrastructure as a service, is one of the questions is how far away is your infrastructure as a service away from you? So one of the things when you move all of your stuff up to the cloud, the whole idea of the cloud, when we talk about the cloud, what are we really saying? Basically what we're saying is we build all this stuff up in the cloud, and we really have no idea where it is. Right? I have no idea where the servers for Google Drive are. I have no idea where the servers for QuickBooks Online are, right? I have no idea where the Salesforce servers are. It's just the cloud, right? I pay for an account, I upload data, it goes somewhere. When I need the data, it comes back to me. What happens? I don't know, right? Well, one of the issues that you start dealing with something like an infrastructure as a service, you have issues with the farther away the data center is that stores your data and does all this stuff from your office, the slower the connection is going to be for your internal infrastructure and for that infrastructure as a service. So one of the cool things that you can do with Amazon is you can actually pick where you want your data center to be. So they've got a lot of data centers. As you can see, they've got data centers on the West Coast, they've got one in Texas, East Coast, they've got Europe, they've got South America. So they've got all of these different data centers here. So when you set up your infrastructure as a service account with AWS, basically you pick essentially where you want the data center to be to make sure that it's going to be closest to you. Now with this is something that you're going to have to be thinking about if you're in a place that doesn't have any of these blue dots. So again, when we start talking about the cloud, when we start talking about infrastructure as a service, one of the problems that we get to in the modern world is everybody thinks it's all or nothing. It's either good or it's bad. Eli, is AWS good or is AWS bad? Tell me now. It's like, well, if you're in the United States, AWS is probably really good for you. It's probably a really good option. Okay, so it's good. Well, if you're in Africa, I probably want to use AWS. So it's bad. No, it just all depends. And again, even like when you're talking about things like South America and Asia and all that kind of stuff, you can see that there's big gaps. If you're in the Middle East, you got to really be thinking, do you want to use something like AWS if there are no data centers around you, even if you're down here in South America? you've really got to think about that. So this is one thing when we're thinking about infrastructure as a service, whether you use AWS, whether you use Azure, whether you use, again, Linode or DigitalOcean or any kind of virtualized services. One of the things you have to be thinking about is how far away are the data centers, not just from you, but from the people that are actually going to be accessing your services. So, and here's something to think about, right? If I am a company in Africa, and I've decided my target audience is the United States, then I may set up my infrastructure in one of the US data centers because, frankly, my users are going to be hitting my infrastructure harder than I am. Right? So this is one of those things you have to be thinking about. Or if I'm in the United States and I'm trying to target Africa, right? There's a lot of do-gooders out there. Eli, we got to change the world. We got to make the world a better place. Let's go to Africa. Might want to ask the Africans before you go there, but you know what? A lot of people say, I want to change the world. Well, let's say you're going to come up with some kind of service. Let's say you're going to come up with some kind of platform or solution for Africans to make the world a better place. Now, you're sitting here in the United States, and you've got really good internet access, and you've got all these AWS data centers all around you, so you go, AWS is an awesome solution. Well, if you're in Africa, and you may not have the best internet connection, and then even when you do have the internet connection, the traffic would have to route all the way back to the US or somewhere else. Again, the question becomes, is AWS good or bad? It depends upon the situation. But this is something very big that you have to be thinking about if you're going to be using AWS, is where are the data centers in relation to you? And also, again, where are the data centers in relation to the users that are going to be using the data center? If you're an American company targeting Africa, you might want to think twice about AWS. I'm not saying don't use it. I'm just, again, there's no right or wrong with IT. It's just, how much money do I have? What are the resources? What are the requirements? And you juggle all those and hopefully come into something that doesn't break every 24 hours. Now the question then becomes, well, Eli, AWS, Linode, DigitalOcean, it's all the same thing. And again, this is very important for you guys to be thinking about as you build out your infrastructure, is to realize AWS and Azure live an entirely different world from things like Linode and DigitalOcean. Again, no snark against Linode or DigitalOcean. Linode and DigitalOcean are fine services if those are the things you want to use, but these are different. Again, we talk about Amazon Web Services or we talk about Microsoft Azure. This is infrastructure as a service. It is compute, and it is storage, and it is networking, and it is databases, and it's whatever other services, Amazon or Microsoft can pull out of their butt and go, I wonder if anybody wants this thing, right? You have to realize with Linode and DigitalOcean, all those are VPSs. All. Again, no snark, but all. So what I mean by that is all that is a virtual private server. So basically you go out there and you can rent your virtual private servers on solid state drives. They can be very fast. They have a lot of resources. But Linode and DigitalOcean, all they are servers. AWS is all of those different services for the infrastructure. So, something that you have to be thinking about. If you want to build something, let's say you want to build, a new media company, right? And really all you're talking about when you create a new media company is you want to create a WordPress site and allow your authors to log in and upload content and all that kind of stuff. Pretty basic, simple thing. It may need a lot of resources, it may need a lot of storage, but it doesn't need a lot of other stuff going on. Right? So for that, go with Linode or DigitalOcean. It's going to be really inexpensive. You're basically going to have one server, maybe two servers. One server, you dump a lot of money into it and it does whatever you need, right? But that is different than if you're going to be doing something such as creating the next Instagram or creating the next Facebook or creating the next Uber or something like that. So with those services, basically you have different servers doing different things. Communication has to be routed. You need different services. And so with something like that, you're going to need an overall infrastructure. So when somebody uploads a picture, what then happens to that picture? Or a picture or a video file, does it get encoded a certain way? Once it's encoded, how many versions of that are stored in different places? When people log in, what happens with all that kind of stuff? So that's the difference here. You deal with AWS or Azure when you're dealing with large-scale infrastructure. Again, even with these cloud services, something like Instagram or Facebook or something like that. Linode and DigitalOcean are just when you need single servers. Just one of those things to be thinking about there. Now, the benefits of AWS, the big benefit of AWS and why most startup companies look at AWS and usually go for AWS is it's highly motherfucking scalable. AWS is scalable in the way you want tech to be scalable, because it really is. Hey boss, yeah, server's running slow. What can we do about it? Feed Amazon more money? Okay, here's a credit card. Right. Like, Amazon is beautiful for scalability. You know how you scale Amazon? Need another $100? Need another $200, right? Basically, that's how you scale Amazon with almost all of their services. There's no migration path. You basically give them an extra $50 a month or whatever, 5 cents per hour or whatever it is, and you get more power. You need another CPU instance. Right? You need more storage. It's all billed based on how much you use it and what you use. So the more you use, the more you pay for. Right? There's no duct tape here. There's no bubble gum. There's no trying to figure out how it works. It is so simple. If your servers and all that are running slow, if things are getting inundated, you pay Amazon more money. There are some problems with that because it does get expensive very quickly. But if you're dealing with like a startup company where you don't want to deal with migrations, again, this is a big thing to understand, right? Migrations suck. They always suck. There is never a point that migrations don't suck. You know when they suck even worse? They suck even worse when your company is growing massively, right? So let's say you have the equivalent. Let's say you have an Instagram. You have a company, and for a long time you've had like 100 users. You have 100 users log in every day. Yay! You're like, look, mommy, I have 100 users logging in every day. And everybody's like, yay! And then all of a sudden, one of these little hipsters over at TechCrunch looks at your service and goes, wow! This is the greatest thing in the world. I can't believe everybody isn't using it. And so TechCrunch does an article about your thing. And since everybody rips everybody else off, VentureBeat then does an article about your thing. And then CNET does an article about your thing. And then right? And then all of a sudden, you go from 100 users a day to 100,000 users a day. Now, here's the thing. If you built this all on your own dedicated server or whatever, most likely it doesn't have the resources to scale from 100 users a day to 100,000 users a day. There's probably starting to break. There's probably starting to be problems. So in order to deal with that, then basically it means you have to build out. You have to build out your infrastructure. You may have to migrate your entire system from the old server to a new server. And, every second of downtime is a user that you might be losing. Really, really, really bad stuff, right? Really bad all the way around. If you have the exact same situation and you're on Amazon, basically you just go like, ooh, our servers are getting hammered. Okay, well, why don't we just have a bigger server? Click. Okay, we'll get the bill at the end of the month, right? That's what you want to do. So the real benefits of AWS is just massively, massively scalable. And so this is one of those things, again, you want to be thinking about is just like when you're building out your infrastructure, do you expect this infrastructure to basically be used the same way a year or 5 years from now that it is right at the second, right? So if you're going to be building out your infrastructure, do you think there's even the remote possibility of a 20-fold or 50-fold increase on the demands on your server? If you're thinking that that's a possibility, that's one of the reasons why you go with Amazon, because it can just expand with you without any problems. On the other hand, if you're like, look, I got 20 employees now, and in 5 years we may have 30 employees, then again, that kind of scalability may not matter. Another benefit for AWS is the total cost of ownership. The TCO is generally lower than private infrastructure. Again, as I talk about, we make bank. You know what I'm saying? Like somebody like me makes a lot of money. Right, in the real world, right? If you are building out infrastructure and you are maintaining infrastructure, real geeks that know what the hell they're talking about, cost a crap ton of money, just like a crap ton of money. And it's not just their salaries, again, their benefits package, all that, fancy cookies and Starbucks and all that kind of stuff costs a lot of money. And one of the reasons that you pay people is because they can deal with everything. If there's an issue with the database servers, they can deal with the database servers. If there's an issue with the networking, they can deal with the networking. So think about it. If you have a normal infrastructure, look and think about all the moving parts in that normal infrastructure. You have servers. Servers have CPUs, servers have motherboards, servers have power supplies, servers have hard drives. All of those things can and will fail, especially as you scale out. Again, if you have one server and it runs for 5 years, there's a relatively good chance that there's not going to be a problem with the hardware. Again, you scale up to 100 servers, right? Right? Things are going to be breaking every other day, right? So you've got the servers, like I say, you've got the switches, you got the networking gear, you got the routers, you've got the backup systems, you've got the UPS, the power supplies, you have all of those things. And so you need to pay people like me basically just to go in there and do a lot of stupid routine maintenance. Swapping power supplies, swapping hard drives, making sure everything stays clean, making sure the cables are run properly, all that kind of stuff. Again, also building out a data center. People don't think about how expensive data centers are to build. A single server rack, you go out and buy a steel server rack is going to be $1,000. Very good server rack. Air conditioners. Trip Light has small data center air conditioners, cost $8,000, right? The power, all of that kind of stuff, the expense really adds up very quickly. And so compare that to Amazon, where you're just like, well, let's do an experiment. We'll feed Amazon $200 this month. And then if it goes poorly, oh well, let's stop paying. Think about that. There's no lost money. If I build out my own data center, even a small data center, even a server rack with 10 servers in it, that's going to be a $20,000 or $30,000 outlay, most likely. And then what happens if the entire thing fails? Right, because that's what happens with most startups. They fail. So you spend $20,000 building a relatively small server rack for your infrastructure, and then it fails, and you're out $20,000. You go with Amazon. You set everything up for $200 a month. If it works, you can scale up massively, and if it doesn't work, okay, you lost $200, $400, $500. No big deal. So as far as the cost, Amazon really does make a lot of sense, especially as you start thinking about how you're going to be scaling out, how you're going to be maintaining it. Another big thing that you have to be thinking about, let's say you're somebody like me. Let's say you're highly technical and you've got some business sensibility. And so you're like, Eli, I want to build my own physical infrastructure. I don't want to deal with Amazon because I can build it myself, right? It is less expensive. So if I have servers laying around, like I said, I used to have, one-use servers just laying around, right? Either they're laying around or I can pick them up inexpensively. I can buy all this stuff rather inexpensively. I can set all this up on my free time. Give me 15 hours in a week and I can set up my own little data center. Amazon does get expensive. If you actually start looking at the numbers, it does get expensive. One of the things that you have to be thinking about, though, is how is your infrastructure going to be maintained once you get too busy to deal with it? This is a huge problem in the startup world. As a lot of people don't think about what's the transition going to be. Yes, you are building this infrastructure now, but in 6 months or a year or 2 years, however long it takes to get off the ground, you are going to have better things to do with your time. You're going to have more valuable things to do with your time than swapping power supplies and all that kind of stuff, right? If you have a custom-built physical infrastructure, that means you're going to have to bring people in that understand how to maintain all this stuff and keep it up in a production environment, 100% more or less uptime. Having your own custom stuff, it's a lot harder to find people that can do that versus if you build out your Amazon Web Service infrastructure. And again, this is one single type of platform that a lot of people, they get used to. It's stable, all that kind of stuff. One of those things you have to think about. Again, highly reliable for the price point. Again, if you got millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars, yes, AWS can actually have issues. Don't get me wrong, it can have issues. But for the price point, for $100 a month, even up to $1,000, I mean, you can buy a lot. You can buy a lot of service of Amazon for $1,000 a month. So you compare $1,000 a month, compare reliability with Amazon versus the reliability you get with almost any other service. Again, geeks, if you're going to contract us, it's $100 an hour minimum. Right? I've seen normal tech geeks, the services that I used to provide, up to $175 or $200 an hour. So basically, for $1,000 a month, you can either get somebody like me for 5 to 10 hours, and that's it, or you can have this highly reliable Amazon Web Services infrastructure. Again, makes a lot of sense. And then finally, the benefit of AWS, especially when you're looking at other things like Linode and DigitalOcean, and you're thinking about piecing things together, is it does give you this whole idea of the centralized billing and management. When you have to go pay bills, when you have to make sure what services you actually own, something to be thinking about is if you go out and you build a virtual infrastructure, a cloud infrastructure piecemeal, right? So you buy servers from Linode, and then you buy DNS services from Dyn DNS, and then you buy this and you buy that, and you buy the other thing. You have so many services out there, it can get very complicated to know who you owe, why you owe, what services you've purchased, all that kind of stuff. If you have one centralized console, you can see, okay, this is all the things that I'm paying for with Amazon. Why am I paying for them? Are they actually being utilized how I think they are? So on and so forth. So having that can be a very useful thing. Now then we go into the problems of AWS. Well, Eli, AWS sounds pretty good. What are the issues with AWS? The first one you always have to think about is lock-in. Especially as Amazon starts pushing out more, I hate to say proprietary services, but they're getting to be a lot closer to proprietary services than the stuff they had in the past. Again, if all you have is virtual servers, if I have virtual Ubuntu servers or virtual CentOS servers, I can basically move those from AWS to Azure to Linode to my own systems. That kind of stuff doesn't really matter. Same thing is like with storage. When you have very basic storage, it's pretty easy to move around. The issue that we're starting to get into now is Amazon is coming out with some really cool products, really products. But they're getting really close to proprietary, right? Again, I talked about Lambda. So Lambda is compute as a service. You feed Lambda node.js scripts, and it just runs those scripts. Well, the issue is let's say you decide to move away from Amazon to something else. What's going to happen with all those scripts? Literally, all of those scripts that have been specifically written for Lambda. If you go over and you use somebody else's services, are you going to have to rewrite those scripts? That is really something you have to think about. Again, back in the old days, it was just moving the virtual machine. Eli, I'm just going to back up this virtual machine locally and then take that local backup and restore it onto another service. That's relatively easy to do. But as you start getting these proprietary services, not so easy. Again, if you look at AWS, they have something called Cassandra, which is basically a MySQL implementation. Really amazingly cool. Stores 64 terabytes of data in a single database. Basically, you connect to this thing. It just does it, right? What used to require a cluster of MySQL servers now it just requires Cassandra. Again, feed it money, right? The issue is too, are you going to be running into lock-in? So this is something that you really have to be thinking about. Lock-in though, a lot of noobs are like, oh, lock-in, I would never use a platform that locks me in. Again, in the IT world, every platform locks you in. Microsoft Active Directory locks you in, right? Exchange Server locks you in. Everything locks you in to a degree. So really, it's not that lock-in should be like, oh, it's lock-in, so I'm not going to use it. It's just one of those things that you have to be thinking about. Is AWS something that you're going to be using for the long haul, or is it something you just plan to use for a year? If you're going to use it for the long haul, you expect AWS is what you're going to use for the next decade, and then again go in a whole hog. If you're like, well, I really think Microsoft Azure is going to be coming out with something better soon. Again, it's just one of those things you just have to be thinking about. Learning curve for AWS. For whatever reason, whenever anybody thinks that something is on the cloud, supposedly it's supposed to be easy, right? If it's on the cloud, it's easy. It's Apple easy. It's on the cloud. Again, we're not dealing with Dropbox, we're not dealing with Drive, we're not dealing with Salesforce. This is infrastructure as a service. So there is a learning curve to AWS. You are building out infrastructure, and so in order to do that, you have to understand how everything works. Do you use a management console in order to connect with a particular service? How do you connect with things like storage? It's not just FTP. There's special ways that you have to connect to storage. In order to get servers online, there's special things things that you have to do in order to get the networking to work. Again, very powerful, but it's its own way of doing it. It's not Cisco, it's Amazon stuff. So there is a learning curve when you're going to be going to AWS, and it's a real learning curve, a real, a technology professional. I mean, it shouldn't be any more than a month. If you spend a decent amount of time during the day for a month, you should be able to get a handle of what basically what you need to know. But again, I mean, a month is a month. There is a learning curve there. The next thing is also making sure you build the correct infrastructure. Again, this is real infrastructure, right? Again, networking services, database services, all kinds of weird services. So if you don't build the infrastructure correctly, you can run into problems. This was one thing, like with regional redundancy. So again, they have multiple regions. So one of the questions you have to ask yourself is, if one AWS region fails, what happens with your infrastructure? Does it go offline until Amazon gets the services back, or do you have a failover somewhere else? So as far as data is concerned, I wouldn't be overly concerned about losing data on AWS, but the question is, if somebody does the equivalent of put a backhoe through their T1 line for where your data center is, what happens with your infrastructure? Does it simply go dark until they fix it, or is everything automatically going to come online somewhere else? You have to be thinking about how that infrastructure works. And then finally, the cost does add up. Again, there's this idea that Amazon is cheap. Of course I'm going to use AWS. It's cheap. No. Right? Because right? Amazon's a little tricky with that, how they tell you things cost, right? So they'll tell you it's like 8 cents per hour or 10 cents per hour. And so you go, wow, look, Eli, it's only 8 cents or 5 cents or whatever per hour. But again, 8 cents per hour, 24 hours a day, 30 days in a month, that 8 cents can go to $60 or $100 really quickly. The other thing that you have to be thinking about as far as things like the cost is concerned is that you get charged for a lot of different things. Like, I have a dedicated server from a particular company. I spend $100 a month, and that's it. That dedicated server runs. I get all of my bandwidth, everything I've purchased, the storage, all of that is just paid for. With Amazon, you do get nickeled and dimed a bit, so that is one of the things you have to be thinking about. When you go over there, you start thinking about things like pricing. Again, pricing in Amazon and AWS is a big deal. Like, pricing in AWS is the equivalent of licensing in the Microsoft world. Again, a lot of people don't want to think about it. Like, Microsoft licensing. I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to hear about it, right? In the Amazon world, it's all about what is the pricing, what is the cost. And if you don't think about this, you are going to screw your company really quick. And so you have to be looking at what the things are going to cost, and especially at the load that you imagine that your services will be under. So there's compute pricing. Whenever you launch your virtual servers or any of that, while they're on, you are getting charged. However large that instance is, however many cores the instance is, whatever, is going to have a certain cost. You have that on 24 hours a day, 30 days a month. You may be shocked to find out what the cost is. The storage pricing, again, so you're going to be storing data. Now you look at it, and hey, 10 cents a gig, right? Hey, Eli, it's only 10 cents a gig. So, 10 cents a gig means, $1 for every 10 gigs, $10 for every 100 gigs, $100 per terabyte. And again, $100 per terabyte for a lot of businesses doesn't matter. $100 per terabyte, that's easy, Eli. But again, if you're going to be coming up with the next Instagram, where you may have, 10 terabytes is $1,000. Right? 100 terabytes is, like $10,000, right? So if you have some kind of service where people are just dumping so much data up there, all of a sudden, a rather small, $10 a month cost literally could be $1,000 a month in the blink of an eye. And so that's one of those things that you have to be thinking about. And again, that goes back to the infrastructure, how you build things out. So if you're going to be having a service, let's say that is a, again, people store media files onto your service. So whether they're pictures, or whether they're audio files, or whether they're video files, when you look at storage cost, one of the things you need to be thinking about is, do you need to run the storage through some kind of compression algorithm, or the media through some kind of compression algorithm or some kind of encoder before it gets stored onto your server? Simply by using FFmpeg and running it through and trying to reduce the size of video or audio files by even like 10% may be a massive difference in cost, especially when you scale up. And that's one of the things you need to be thinking about as you want to build out your infrastructure. You don't want to have to implement some kind of compression system when you have the $1,000, $10,000 storage bill. You want to think, I can imagine having $1,000, $10,000 per month storage bill. How am I going to try to reduce that? I'm going to try to reduce that by, when they upload, it goes into a particular bucket. We then have an encoding system that then takes it, encodes it, and then dumps it. These are kind of things you have to be thinking about. Bandwidth pricing, man, bandwidth can kill you. Holy crap, right? Again, when you start looking at things like, especially if people are downloading files, if you're basically doing something like a text website, some kind of text, then they go and it's not very much data. But again, you start looking at pictures, you start looking at video files, you start looking at audio files. That stuff starts going out to 100 users a day, 1,000 users a day, 10,000 users a day. You would be surprised how those bandwidth costs can increase massively. And then there's also interaction pricing, get commands, post commands, whenever you're going to be touching stuff up on Amazon services. Again, it seems like a really low cost, like whatever it is. But if you have 1,000 people, 10,000 people, 100,000 people hitting your infrastructure a day, those very, 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 very small costs can add up really quick. And so this is what you have to look at. Again, the nice part, like I rent a dedicated server. I pay $100 a month, and it's a quad-core Xeon processor, 16 gigs of RAM, 128 gig solid-state drive with a gig pipe to the internet. I pay $100 a month. If it doesn't get used, basically, if the server is turned off, I pay $100 a month. If the server is getting the hell hammered out of it, I pay $100 a month. Doesn't matter, right? Amazon Web Services, if you have it turned off, you pay nothing. If you're not using it, you pay nothing. Yay! If it starts getting hammered to high hell and back, oh my God, the price can go up shockingly fast. As far as migrating to AWS, you're thinking about it, you're like, AWS sounds kind of good. AWS sounds kind of good. How could I migrate my infrastructure up there? Because again, infrastructure as a service, you're thinking about, I've got my own internal infrastructure. How could I migrate it up? Maybe do like some kind of hybrid cloud infrastructure or something like that. As far as migrating to AWS, how it goes, it could either be very difficult or it could be very hard. Again, they have virtual servers. They have relatively simple storage. So if you're going to migrate, let's say your web servers up to AWS, you're going to migrate some pretty simple servers up to AWS. You're going to have to learn how to create virtual servers up there, and you're going to have to learn how to open up the ports and all that kind of stuff. But relatively, learning curve is like a couple of weeks. In a couple of weeks, you could probably learn how to do it and actually get it done and be done, right? On the other hand, if you actually want the full benefits of the Amazon Web Services infrastructure, then you have to think about redoing your entire architecture. Again, you can just move your virtual machines up there and be done with it. But if you really want the power of AWS, if you really want all of the possibilities, then what's going to be very difficult is you really have to reimagine what your architecture should look like. So this is one of those things that people don't think about anymore. Architectures all kind of sort of look the same, right? We're all trying to figure out architecture like 20 years ago. Oh, how do we build this stuff? And then we all kind of settled down on how you build things, right? You have your couple of Active Directory servers here. You have your storage solution over here. You have your antivirus stuff here. You have, and basically you have a way that things are done. You have your Cisco switches and Cisco routers here. This is how it looks. Well, if you're going to really if you're really going to use AWS for everything that it's worth, you really have to reimagine how that architecture should look. That architecture can look any way that you want. Again, in the physical world, If you're going to create a multi-layer network, right? So basically, you're going to create a network where everything is separated, so even if a hacker gets into it, it's very difficult to get around. Well, in the real world, in the physical world, in order to create a multi-layer network, every single layer needs its own router. And if you're going to go with Cisco, it's going to be anywhere between $500 to $5,000 per. So if you create some whack-ass system with 20 routers, that's going to cost you $10,000 to $30,000, $50,000 to do that, plus all the switches and everything that are there. So when you think that every single router in the real world is going to cost you $500 to $1,000, you're going to simplify your architecture to the point that you don't have to buy all those routers and switches. Right? Well, here's the thing. When things like routers and switches become virtual, when storage becomes virtual, when all these services are basically just there on demand, you can start creating very, very, very complex, secure architectures, because it doesn't matter. The cost is not that much more expensive. You're not spending $20,000 for all this different networking equipment. You're simply typing in a few different configurations and getting billed an extra $10 a month, right? And so this is something that you really need to be thinking about if you're going to be using Amazon Web Services for your infrastructure, is that you can totally, entirely reimagine how things are done. It does not have to look the way things were before, because you're now not under the same constraints. You don't have all these physical devices. Again, one of the problems you get into in the real world is your server room is simply physically as big as your server room is. If you have a server room that has enough room for one rack, and then you have this idea for some kind of weird virtual cluster, and you need to put in another rack, but there's no physical room for it, then you're stuck. You have a simple infrastructure because of cost, because of all of these constraints. Well, think about it. You go to AWS, and there's no physical constraints that way. It's just simply up on there. If you want another server, you just simply spin it up. Again, as long as you got the money, you could do it. So it really changes the way that you can look at building your infrastructure, and really should change the way that you look at infrastructure. If you look at your AWS infrastructure and it is as relatively simple as architecture as your local architecture is, it most likely means you're doing it wrong. It most likely means you're doing it wrong because there are all of these ways, like I say, to section things off, to secure things. Only this server can communicate with this server. There's so many things that you can do that the architecture up on AWS should look really, 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 really different. Now, if you're interested in this whole Amazon thing, you're like, yes, AWS sounds like the way to go, which more or less it is. I mean, at the end of the day, in 5 years, whether you go with AWS or whether you go with Azure, or whether you go with something that pops up between now and 5 years from now, basically this is the way things are going. So if you want to learn more about this, there's a lot of education out there. The cool part with Amazon is that there's a lot of free education out there. There's YouTube videos out there. If you go to the AWS website, they have lots and lots and lots of tutorials, lots of explanations. Basically, if you want to learn how AWS works and be able to learn enough to actually be able to start deploying your own stuff, there are a lot of free things out there. The other thing that I like with Amazon is that they know for a fact that in order to get people to use their products, people have to understand their products. So they've just got so much. They've got in-person classes. They've got conferences. They have a conference in Las Vegas every fall. They have a lot of different ways that you can learn this stuff. So basically, just go and just start learning it. Just start playing around. Give them a couple of bucks. Start playing around with different things. That's the other thing that's nice. Is again, you can use the actual products, but in a very, very limited amount, right? So you're only paying for a server for however many hours it's on, right? So again, in a production environment, 24 hours a day, 30 days a month, right? They charge you a lot more than you expect. But for testing environment, you go home, you launch a few of these services, you play with them for 5 hours, then you shut it down. Right? 5 hours worth of being able to test and experiment and all that might cost you $1. Right? Again, $1,000 to figure something out is a little bit of money. $2, $1 to $3 for 5 hours of playing around really isn't so bad. So those are some of the nice things with learning at Amazon. They do have AWS certifications, because I know you guys just love certifications. Eli, how do I get my certification? If you go to aws.amazon.com/certification, you can learn more about their whole certification programs. Would I get certifications? I don't know. You know what I'm saying? Like, right? I know some people do ask for them. I know it's definitely not a bad thing to have on your resume. Would that be the first certification I'd go for? Probably not. But again, I do know you guys are fans of certifications, so you can go there and take a look at it. Final thoughts as far as AWS goes. Again, it's great if it's what you need. It can get very expensive and very complicated, though, if it's not what you need. Overall, though, this is something. Again, we're kind of like, as I said before, we're in like that 2007, 2008 time frame for Microsoft administrators, where there was a time when Microsoft administrators, all they needed to know was Microsoft. Windows Server, you're good, right? And they were in demand. It was worth a lot of money, and it was great. And if you didn't know Linux, frankly, nobody cared, right? If you knew Linux back in the day, people were like, ooh. They were all like, ooh, but it didn't matter. They were like, wow, I wish I knew Linux. And you say, why? Well, yeah, I guess nothing here runs on Linux, right? But you start moving forward, and now at this point in time, if you don't know Linux and you're a system administrator, what the hell are you doing, right? Same kind of thing is true with this whole infrastructure as a service. It's if you don't know it right now, it's not going to keep you from getting a job. It's not going to keep you from getting promoted. I'm telling you guys, though, if you want to be real IT professionals and you want to know that you're going to have a job in 5 years, you need to start learning this stuff now and getting solid in it. Because again, whether it's Amazon or whether it's Azure, or whether it's some other services, these cloud services are here to stay. I don't know what it is with people. People keep arguing. They're like, the cloud! I can't wait till the cloud explodes. And everybody realizes how stupid they were. The cloud is here to stay. If the cloud explodes, it's going to be bad. It's going to be like starvation level bad. The cloud is here. The cloud infrastructure, all of that is here. Whether you migrate everything in the world up to the cloud, that is an argument for a different day, but it is here. If you are running an IT department and you are not slowly migrating things to these cloud services, I would argue you're setting your department and your company way back for a lot of reasons. Again, I understand. Everybody's like, oh, we have this super secure whatever. And by all means, don't move your super secure. You got your super secure, who the hell knows what, fine. Leave it internal. It's not protected any better internal than external. But hey, you believe it's protected internal, so fine. But I'm sure you have a lot of other different services out there that don't need that level of security, don't need that level of I need to know exactly where that server is. And again, if you have servers, if you have devices, power supplies fail, motherboards fail, CPUs fail, all this kind of stuff fails. And when it does, your system is out of commission until you fix it. If you move it up to the cloud, you don't have to worry about that anymore. If it's up on AWS, you don't have to worry about power supplies failing on AWS. You don't have to worry about motherboards failing on AWS. You don't have to worry about CPU heatsink fans getting clogged up. It just goes up there and runs and runs and runs and runs and runs and runs and runs. So again, final thoughts for AWS. Do it, right? The only reason not to start moving stuff to AWS is if you'd rather start moving stuff to Microsoft Azure. But really, it's kind of one of those, pick one or the other. Again, as you may or may not know, I do a lot of other projects. So I have different YouTube channels. So Fail Normal is my little vlog channel. If you haven't been able to go to Fail Normal, take a look at Fail Normal. Eli Computer Guy Live is my question and answer channel. Definitely go over there if you want to see people send me questions and I answer it there. We do Silicon Discourse Skype meetings. So again, I've done over 200 Silicon Discourse Skype meetings at this point. I do 2 every single day. So if you're interested, go to silicondiscourse.com. And I'm very excited to say that we are starting the Silicon Discourse meetup. And actually tomorrow, well, tomorrow for me. Who knows for you? Tomorrow for me, we're doing the first meetup. And basically the idea is kind of like the Silicon Discourse meeting, but in a group environment, physical, right? So we're going to be doing it up at Wegmans in Hunt Valley tomorrow. But then in the future, we'll do it other places. But basically the idea is we have people come in, you sit beside me, you get my one-on-one undivided attention while other people are watching, and we talk about whatever issues is you're having. So if you're trying to launch a startup company and you want to know about advertising or should I do with AWS or should I do with local? We talk about that. If you want to do virtualization, if you're like Eli, should we go with Hyper-V or ESXi? If you want to talk about career development, what programming languages should I learn? All that kind of crap that I talk about all the time. Basically, you just sign up for the meetup, come on in, and we will talk about it. And the good part is it's kind of like that group environment. So while we're talking, you get my one-on-one undivided attention, and everybody else at the table just kind of keeps quiet unless I point at them. But then at the end of it, right, other people can say, hey, I have some ideas for you. Right, and then you can communicate amongst yourselves and being like, "Hey, I know somebody that needs a service like that. Oh, you're going to create a web design company. You know what, my grandma, or you know what, my cousin or my uncle or whatever really needs a website designed." Basically, trying to do that thing. So we do have the Baltimore area. It's meetup.com/Silicon Discourse ETCG, and the reason it's ETCG is my idea is if this works out, that it could be like multiple Silicon Discourses. So you can have like the main guru for each Silicon Discourse, and then it can be like named for them. So like Silicon Discourse, Lewis. I always laugh whenever I say Lewis, because he's probably like, oh, I don't want to do a fucking meetup, Eli. But hey, if he did, right? Or basically Silicon Discourse and the person's name, so it could expand if that's how it go. And that's kind of thought. Definitely take a look at the meetup though, because the meetup, I'm very hopeful for the meetup. Again, we haven't done one yet, but I'm very, very hopeful for the meetup. Finally, again, the sponsors. Don't ask you for thumbs up. I don't ask you for comments. I don't ask you for subscriptions. But if you go click on the links below. That is very useful for me. And again, they're all IT vendors, and so they're probably good for you. Again, INE. They do online training. They've got a lot of good stuff. Bugcrowd, Plixer, Spiceworks. All of these people. These are all technology companies. So it's not just that they pay me, which I always like, but they're also actually good services for you. And on those lines, if you want to sponsor me, we still got 4 sponsorship slots open. So I max it out at 10. So as far as sponsorships go, you will get 1 tweet length shout out during the show, like you heard before. You get your link in the bottom, and I max that out at 10. So we're up to 6 right now. So if you want to sponsor us, we will happily take your money. And as always, make YouTube great again. I'll see you guys in the next one of these video classes.